On Christmas Eve morning, a parking officer moves to ticket a street vendor outside a crowded cafe, and a pressed barista buys his entire tamale stock to keep his cart from being seized. The act costs her the cash she saved for rent and risks trouble at work, but it softens the room and sparks quiet imitators, including the officer. Later, both reveal the pressures they carry, and the night ends with a simple meal that makes the cold feel lighter. Just a quick note before we begin: hit like, share this with a friend, and subscribe for more. Also, let me know in the comments which country you're watching from. It always amazes me how far these stories travel. He set his cooler at the corner outside the coffee shop, between a city trash can and a short snow pile the plows had missed. Steam seeped from the lid and made small clouds in the cold. He had a folding card table with a red plastic cloth, a hand-lettered sign that said Tamales Red G Green, $3 each, and a tiny speaker that wheezed out carols like it had a cold. His gloves had the fingertips cut off. The hat with a fuzzy ball on top sank low on his ears. People hurried past. They kept their faces tucked into scarves. The coffee shop windows fogged from the inside. In the glass you could see a wreath over the door and a string of paper snowflakes someone had cut and taped at a tilt. It was Christmas Eve morning, which meant office workers in eggnog moods and last-minute shoppers with lists. The man folded and unfolded his fingers over the steam and waited. He warmed his palms and took a bite of his own red tamale, a small one that he kept in a foil square by the stove. The masa was soft. The sauce had heat. He closed his eyes for a second and hummed along to the carol. He glanced up every time someone slowed near him and smiled with his whole face. A couple of people smiled back. One woman told him her grandma used to make them. Then she went inside. Through the fogged window, the woman at the espresso machine watched him. She wore a green apron over a red sweater, a small hoop in her nose, and her hair was short, a little spiky where the steam escaped the wands. People shouted orders like they were calling numbers at a raffle. She stacked paper cups, wiped the counter with quick circles, and tried not to look out too much. When she could, she looked. The rush built. The line curled around the pastry case and out the door. A kid in a puffy coat dragged a candy cane along the baseboard, leaving a sticky stripe. Someone knocked over a display of gingerbread men. The woman in the apron reset the cookies, nodded at every. "Can you make it extra hot? And no whip, and do you have any oat?" The parking officer stopped by his table at 9:14, right when the espresso machine made the tired hiss it always did. Her coat was navy with a reflective vest. The handheld printer at her hip blinked a green light. Her bun was tight enough to pull her eyebrows up. She pointed to the sign. She pointed to the cooler. She pointed to the sidewalk. The man nodded and kept saying, "Please, quiet," like the word might fly away if he said it loud. His English was good enough for small talk. This wasn't small talk. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, something official-looking with creases soft from the many times he'd opened it. It was a permit for another block, valid through last month. He touched his chest, then the cooler, then the little speaker sputtering. Silent night. He tried to smile. He left the smile on even when it made no sense. She clipped a ticket to the handle of his cooler. The thin paper shook in the wind. The officer's voice didn't carry a shout. She had a monotone for this, and it went the same way with everyone. "No vending on this sidewalk," she said. "No current permit. You've been warned before." She angled her body toward the radio clipped on her shoulder. "If you don't clear the area, we have to seize the cart." The man looked at the cooler like it had turned into something else. His hand hovered over the lid. He had 60 tamales left. He'd counted 3 times that morning with the care of someone counting more than food. Once they were gone, he could go home. He could give his grandson the little toy car wrapped in old newspaper. He had hoped for that rush between 9 and noon. He felt the time closing. Inside, the woman watched the scene fold out. A guy with a Bluetooth headset was tapping his credit card on the counter like a drum. She could feel the line's heat on her skin and the frustration thickening in the room. Same as most mornings lately. Her manager had said last week, "We need speed. Merry people tip more when it's fast." She pictured the man's hands, cracked in the cold, hovering over the ticket. "Give me 1 sec," she said to the person at the register, her voice thin from overwork and steam. She wiped her hands on her apron and told the tall barista at the pastry case, "Cover for me. 2 minutes." He stared at her like he'd misheard. Then he stared at the line. She untied her apron and stepped outside, the cold hitting her lungs like menthol. Her boots slid on the slush. Her breath puffed out and mixed with the steam from the cooler. The officer noticed her and straightened. as if the presence of witness made her go even more by the book. "Can you give him an hour?" she asked the officer. "I'll buy coffee for you. Or a sandwich. Something. Just," she looked at the man. His eyes kept doing that smiling thing from habit, but his mouth was tight. The officer shook her head. "I gave him a warning last week," she said. "And the week before. I don't make the rules. I just enforce what I get paid to enforce." She held out a gloved hand toward the cooler. It was the kind of gesture that meant she was trying to make her body language bland and unthreatening, even as she did something threatening. The woman swallowed. She looked through the window at the line, at the green aprons moving like a small frantic dance. She looked at the man's little sign. She could hear in her head her manager's voice, the one that lived there even when he wasn't in the room. No personal sales, no solicitations, no side deals on company time. She turned to the man. "How much for all of them?" she asked. Her voice shook the tiniest bit. The tiny speaker on the table squeaked into Feliz Navidad and then cut to static. He blinked. "All," he said. "All," she said. "Red and green." She pointed at the cooler and made the money sign with her fingers, because her brain had decided that if her mouth was going to jump, it would take the hands along for the ride. He did 3 counts in his head fast, like he had rehearsed it in case someone asked this in a dream. He said a number that hurt him even as he said it, because it was less than full price, because it had to be. He said it anyway. She nodded. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small white envelope with her name on it in block letters. The envelope had been thick this morning. She'd filled it with tips from the last 2 weeks, and cash she set aside by cooking rice and stretching leftovers and saying no to coffee on her own breaks. She opened it. She didn't count in front of him. She put the money in his hand more than his number, because she couldn't make her body stop once it started. Her fingers were cold. His were colder. He closed his fist over it and looked like he was trying not to. Like the muscle memory of refusal had to fight a stronger muscle that knew a roof didn't happen by pride. Back inside, she flipped the open sign to hang on the right side instead of crooked. She pushed 2 tables together near the window and moved the poinsettia to the pastry case. She rolled the cooler in and set it by the heat vent. The tall barista stared so wide his eyes rounded. "What are you doing?" he whispered, like whispering would make it not a policy violation. "Lunch special," she said. "On me. Tamales. Red and green." She said it like she'd been given an award and now had a mic. She didn't have a mic. She had her voice, which was loud enough when she needed it. She put an index card by the register. "Free tamales today. Merry Christmas." She didn't add her name. She went back to the machine and started pulling shots like a machine herself, with a new set of counts in her head. If she kept moving, she wouldn't think about the empty envelope and the way her breathing had gone shallow, like after a sprint. The room warmed in a way the heater never managed. People took cups and plates and the tamales steamed and fogged up the front glass in soft waves. The smell was rich and homey, the kind of smell that made people stop talking about shipping delays and start saying, "My aunt uses banana leaves," even if no one asked. The man stood near the cooler, shy with his hands, ready with napkins, and red is spicy, green is mild. The officer paused at the door and watched for a second. Her face did not do the thing faces do in movies. She didn't burst into apology. She said, "Pack up after, okay?" to the man, and he nodded so many times the fuzzy ball on his hat wagged like a metronome. He tried to hand some back to her later, when the swell broke and the room had that post-rush hush, the kind that makes the clinks and taps sound like they matter. He slipped an old envelope under the pastry case, the corner peeking out like a dog testing a room. She saw it, slid it back to him under her palm, and kept her eyes on the espresso line so she could pretend she wasn't doing a big thing with a small gesture. He said, "For your sister," because he had listening ears and had heard, over the last month, the times she'd stepped out to answer calls from a clinic. The times she said, "I'll move her to the couch near the window," to no one in particular when the morning was slow. He had seen the hospital bracelet once, sliding out from her sweater cuff like a secret fish. She stopped wiping the counter. She looked at him. The rent envelope was thin as paper, and folded so many times it had been reduced to a crease. "It's okay," she said. "Take your grandson the car." He changed something in his face, something like a door opening and closing in one movement. "My daughter is on a bus," he said quiet, like telling the inside of a church a story. "From McAllen. They couldn't get the money until last night. If I do not get rent today, we are out at the end of the week." She nodded. He didn't have to say more. She didn't either. She had her own numbers in her head, a manager who would check the till tonight, and a small apartment with a window that let in a ribbon of cold air along the sill. She pictured her sister on the couch with a blanket and a knitted hat from a church somewhere. She pictured the envelope empty in her pocket like a mouth. A guy in a hard hat slid a 20 across the counter and said for the next person, without touching his eyes to hers for more than a second. He took a red tamale for himself and did that grunt men do when they are pleased with food but don't want to say it out loud. A woman in a blue scarf, her lipstick the kind that doesn't smudge even with coffee, took a green tamale and left a stack of singles in the tip jar without making a show. The jar filled like snow collects, slow, quiet, and then suddenly you look up. And it's a small drift. The officer came back in 20 minutes later, not for enforcement, but with a paper bag from somewhere on the block. She set it near the cooler. "Hot packs for hands," she said, like she was talking to the air, and a warning instead of the ticket. "Keep moving next week." She slid a flattish envelope onto the side of the table and left before someone could say thank you to a uniform. The tall barista, the one who could reach the top shelf without a stool, put a hand on her shoulder as she closed the shift on the register. "Take Christmas morning," he said. "I'll cover. Take your sister to see the tree in the square. I can get here early." She looked at him and at the screen and at the numbers she knew by heart now. Someone had organized in the line without her. They'd stacked cups, wiped a spill, bundled napkins. You never really know who will pivot when a thing tilts. The man packed up as the afternoon slid dark a little faster than he wanted it to. He tied the sign to the handle of his cooler with a loop he could untie with hands and gloves. He waved at the woman and the tall barista and pointed at the window, then tapped his chest, and then pointed at the little speaker like he was saying, "Music heart window." He had never learned the quick English for that. He left with the cooler lighter by 62 tamales, heavier by the cash that kept him halfway closer to his week. The snow had that not commitment snow quality, soft, slushy, like the sky couldn't be bothered to decide. On the bus, a kid pressed both hands to the window and wrote backwards letters to his mom on the fog. The man looked out and smiled, the smile that wasn't a habit now. She tucked the empty envelope in the pocket of her coat like a note she would want to remember. It scratched her knuckles when she reached for her gloves. She checked her phone. A text from her sister. They had given her an extra blanket. Could she bring something spicy tonight? Because the hospital food tasted like wet cardboard. Small kindness is not free. You pay with money or minutes or the look someone gives you because you didn't do your job the way they wanted it done. But sometimes you plant warm hope in a cold day, and it gives off heat you didn't expect. Sometimes it loops back in the shape of a hard hat guy, or a blue scarf woman, or a parking officer who decides a warning has more sense than a ticket because, come on, it is snowing and the carols are so thin they need help. In this room, on this corner, the air shifted. No marches, no speeches, just hot food and hot coffee, and the idea that maybe you can be the person who stops the day and says, "Hold up, we can do this other thing." They ate at the little table by the window when her shift was done. Her sister wore a hat with a little pom on top. The lights on the small fake tree blinked slow, unsynced like they were thinking it over. Outside, the snow started to give up trying to be rain and committed to flakes that caught the light as they fell. On the sill, 2 cups steamed side by side, and a strip of tape on the window held back the draft by barely a finger. Good enough for now.